Welcome back to the King's Corner, the place for all things Bethesda. I am the KingFanMan. With Bethesda's next RPG being set in space, Starfield, we're going to do something special here on the KingFanMan channel. We're going to do a Real Places series set in space. Today's story is a real story that happened with NASA's Apollo 8. So sit back and enjoy this a little bit scary but real story about Apollo 8. Are we alone in the universe? This is possibly one of the most asked questions today. Even the most staunch skeptic cannot dismiss some of the amazing evidence that has currently been revealed. For decades past, massive numbers of witnesses have come forward telling unbelievable stories of flying saucers, strange lights, shapes in the sky, even contact with beings not of this world. Their testimonies were suppressed, of course, even though many times some of these witnesses were members of law enforcement, even highly regarded members of the military, sometimes even astronauts that went to the moon. It wasn't until the last few years that the American government finally admitted publicly that they had seen and had contact with crafts of unknown origin on multiple occasions. And if some still have doubts, the U.S. government has now released footage to the public of U.S. military planes and ships encountering these strange vessels. And these vessels can move like no other flying machine man has ever made. They can stop and start seemingly instantly and make turns at nearly right angles and at speeds that would cause enough G-force to instantly kill any human if it happened to be on board. These unbelievable vessels have been seen flying in our skies, just out of our atmosphere, and maybe most surprisingly, under water in our oceans. With eyewitnesses and video evidence, we are only left with one question. Not, do they exist? The question now is, where do they come from? Is this proof of alien life from some distant planet? Or could it possibly be some secret technology from one of Earth's militaries? Whatever these crafts are, wherever they come from, they're here now. But does this mean that many of the witnesses from decades past were seeing the same things? Should we now take their testimony more serious? Maybe even look back at their evidence to help answer our questions today? What better place to start in looking back than Apollo 8? Why Apollo 8? Because it was the first manned spacecraft to leave low Earth orbit and go into deep space. It was the first manned spacecraft also to reach the moon. Many think of Apollo 11 because it was the first to land on the moon, but Apollo 8's mission was to orbit the moon several times to test the conditions of both the moon orbit and the moon surface for the possibility of a future landing on the moon. The United States began its organized space program in 1958 by order of Dwight D. Eisenhower. The Mercury and Gemini programs ran from 1958 to 1966 and successfully achieved getting the first crewed spacecraft into low Earth orbit. But this was in the days of the space race between the United States and the Soviet Union, and low Earth orbit was not the goal. The winner would only be crowned when and if they reached the main goal, the moon. So in 1960, also under the direction of Dwight Eisenhower, the Apollo program was born, with its goals of orbiting flights of the moon and, of course, ultimately, a crewed lunar landing. Believe it or not, Apollo 8 was only the second crewed Apollo mission, mainly because the crew of Apollo 1 tragically lost their lives in a cabin fire during a test launch at Cape Kennedy. Apollo 7 simply achieved low Earth orbit to test the spacecraft. So it was Apollo 8 that got the honor of going all the way to the moon. The honor and the challenge. No spacecraft in history had ever left low Earth orbit. Now they were going to attempt to travel 238,900 miles away from Earth. Not to mention having to traverse the radiation belts that protect the Earth as well. These are just a couple of the dangers and a couple of the main reasons why Apollo 8 was originally planned to be an uncrewed mission to the moon. It was in fact a last-minute decision made by NASA, made mainly because, as mentioned earlier, the United States was in an intense space race with the USSR. It would have been far safer to first test the Saturn V rocket with an unmanned craft. Now, the Saturn V was the largest rocket ever to be attached to a spacecraft. But because of cost and the space race, the last-minute decision was made to make Apollo 8 a crewed mission. And the crew was set. Commander Frank Borman, with crewmates James Lovell and William Anders. The mission also was set to leave low Earth orbit and to travel almost 240,000 miles to the moon. Once at the moon, put the spacecraft in orbit of the moon, and as the spacecraft orbits the moon, to document by video, photograph, and instruments all possible information on the moon, then return to the Earth 6 days later. What a daunting and challenging mission. I cannot imagine the emotions these men had in the days leading up to their mission. Exactly as the TV show of the time, Star Trek, made famous, saying, they were boldly going where no man had gone before. On December 21st, 1968, Apollo 8 launched at 7:51 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
T-minus 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9. We have ignition sequence start. The engines are armed. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. We have commit. We have liftoff. Liftoff at 7:51 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Looks good.
Cleared the tower.
Oh, and there's the rumble in our building. It looks good. It looks like a good flight. It's a beautiful takeoff so far. This building is shaking under us. Our camera platform is shaking. But what a beautiful flight.
The launch was perfect, but now was the time to truly make history. The J-2 engine of the spacecraft was about to start and send these three men further away from Earth than any human had ever ventured. At this point, there are literally thousands of preparations the astronauts are going through at a frenetic pace, because they have to have everything ready and checked when the craft reaches the correct distance and angle to fire the next stage to exit the Earth's orbit. Maybe it was good there was so much to do. Each crew member was so busy they didn't have the time to worry or consider that they were about to attempt something that no other human had ever done. It took 2 orbits around the Earth to get everything just right, and it was now time. It was now or never. A short countdown was given for the J-2 engine, and they all buckled themselves back into their seats. The countdown started sounding on the radio. Now was the time for the emotions, for the worry. But there was more than just worry. Pure fear came across these men, even these brave men. Yes, their hearts were in their throats. They knew as soon as that engine fired that not only would they be doing something that no one had ever done before, they would also be doing something that had never been tested before. Remember, NASA skipped the test because of the space race and because of cost. They also knew that the J2 engine would push the spacecraft to an unreal 24,000 miles an hour, and it would also have to hold that speed for over 250,000 miles through deep space. I'm sure they had so many questions going through their mind. Will the spacecraft hold up to that speed and for that long? Will I be able to hold up to the G-forces? No matter what worries they had, the J2 engine countdown was winding down and it was too late. They were about to be launched to the moon. Lovell turned to Anders and gave him an encouraging smile, and then turned to his commander, but Commander Borman did not turn his gaze from the gauges. And then they all heard 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The crew felt the rumble from behind them. The liquid oxygen and the liquid hydrogen flowed from the separate tanks and mixed in the combustion chamber. The exhaust exploded out of the engine bell, and the crew felt the rumble intensify. And they looked out the window and saw the ship accelerating. They were on the way to the moon. For the next 68 hours, they would be going 238,000 miles an hour, over 250,000 miles, until they made it to the moon. Those 68 hours passed fast, and it was now day 3 of the mission, and they had reached the moon.